It is illegal to copy or to use an illegal copy of this video or DVD. Protect yourself and your organisation by making sure that only videos and DVDs which have been legally purchased are used by your organisation. Over 100,000 people gathered to watch the much publicised event.
Take a few seconds to think about all the work that went into this project. Think about the leadership, the managers, the staff, the operators, the contractors. Think about all of the decisions that had to be made at every level, all leading to this moment.
A young girl was killed instantly when she was struck by a piece of flying metal. She was standing in a crowd beyond the lake, over 400 metres from the planned implosion. A number of other spectators were injured by flying metal and debris.
Ranging from chest injuries through to shock.
Risk is an integral part of every business, every process and every activity. Whether it is investing in a new technology, taking on a different supplier, buying a piece of equipment or hiring a new staff member.
Dr. Patel was appointed as a senior medical officer in surgery at Bundaberg Hospital. He immediately assumed the position of director of surgery. Over 2 years, Dr. Patel saw 1,450 patients. 88 of Dr. Patel's patients died. A clinical review has since found that Dr. Patel directly contributed to the deaths of 13 patients. Dr. Patel abruptly left the country, and it was the hospital management which found itself having to answer questions at the Commission of Inquiry.
Every time as a manager I make a decision, I in fact create a risk that have I made the right decision and can I manage it to a successful outcome?
Management cannot avoid risk, but risk is as much about maximising opportunities as it is protecting against loss.
The thing with risk management is, remember, it comes from the word riscare, which is to dare. And we don't dare to do things that we expect to fail. We dare because we think that we'll succeed.
Generally, the focus on risk management is people look at the negative, and if we really examine what risk is about, risk is a chance of something happening that could impact upon your objectives. It's really important to have those objectives as our primary focus, because then our focus in risk management is going to be more opportunity-based.
The new technology and ticketing system was introduced to streamline administration and reduce fare evasion. The changes proved so popular with customers that there's been a surge in bus and subway usage.
So the management of risk, and risk is very much about how do we grasp opportunities whilst managing them to minimise the loss. And we're not about eradicating risk, we're about managing risk to a tolerable level.
An organisation can manage risk by screening out events which can either cause harm or which can reduce the chance of getting the best possible outcome. One screen is the leadership of the organisation. Another screen is the organisation's management systems. The most effective screen is an explicit risk management system. It is made up of 7 essential steps. The integrity of each screen can mean success or failure. Any cracks or holes could allow an event to occur which affects the organisation's performance in pursuit of its objectives. And sometimes a diabolical combination of factors can come together to trigger a major disaster.
Four young sailors were killed and 5 others seriously injured after a fireball engulfed the engine room of the petroleum tanker the Westralia, the biggest ship in the Australian Navy.
Every organisation has a unique set of objectives, challenges, opportunities and, of course, risks.
A spokesperson said that the high cost of public liability insurance is threatening the survival of country shows and local sport. In Michigan, several people were trampled as hordes of shoppers flooded through the doors in search of bargains at the traditional start of the holiday season sales.
When things go badly wrong, one of the characteristics is that the sequence of events is described afterwards as being inconceivable. The causes appear so straightforward, it is hard to imagine how it was allowed to happen.
A massive sea search failed to find the American couple. They were on a Barrier Reef scuba diving trip with 23 other tourists when they were accidentally left behind in the open sea. The fact that they were missing was not discovered until the following day.
It's my deep regret that we believe at this time there have been 14 loss of life as a result of the fire this afternoon.
Most of the cases presented in this video are from organisations with established risk management policies and frameworks. So what went wrong? Was one surgeon solely to blame for the patient deaths, or were there wider issues at play? Where were the cracks in the risk management? Leadership determines the direction and culture of the organisation. Leaders need to promote common goals and empower individuals at all levels to act.
The role of leadership is setting up the appropriate infrastructure and framework that is appropriate for the business to allow people to manage risk, setting the tone from the top, really giving the definition of focus of what type of risk planning they'd like. And then secondly, looking at the risk information to ensure that that's moving around the organisation to where it needs to go and being escalated to the right level.
The BP investigation found that one of the causes was that the working environment had eroded to one characterised by resistance to change and lacking in trust and motivation. The end result was that rules were not consistently followed.
It's up to the various levels of management to in fact get out and convince their people that yes, we are serious about the management of risk. Yes, I expect you to tell me the bad news and the really ugly news so that I can make better decisions, rather than wait for things to happen.
The report stated that there was a tendency of administration to ignore or suppress criticism. There also existed a culture of concealment of some practices and conduct. This culture started at the top with successive governments.
Organisations sometimes become so focused on a particular outcome that they allow it to overwhelm all other considerations.
The inquiry found that budgets placed too much emphasis on attaining target numbers and too little on patient care.
Management systems, standards and procedures, as well as industry and government requirements, all have an implicit role in risk management.
Liken risk management to an umbrella. What are the risks I have to manage? If they happen to be quality or environment or rock health and safety, then there are standards available for me to go to and help me manage those risks, to put in systems to show that I am in fact managing those risks.
The Board of Inquiry found that while there was no single cause, the fire started by diesel fuel from a burst flexible hose spraying onto a hot engine component and then igniting. The new hose was supplied by the ship's contractor to replace original pipes. To the questions, was the equipment fit for purpose? Were the systems and procedures on board effective to maintain safe operation? And was there a management system to monitor performance? The Board of Inquiry found the answers must be no.
Communication and consultation with internal and external stakeholders is the first step of the risk management process. It is also essential to every step in the process.
We deliberately use the two words communication and consultation, because communication is about telling you what we're doing, how we're doing, why we're doing. But consultation is sitting down and actually talking to you and listening to you. It's a two-way dialogue. Very hard to do in many cases.
The authority collected information from its customers to support its decision to implement the $700 million fare collection system.
But if we don't have the consultation, then we have real problems in how we go about managing risk.
Many changes in a complex organisation led to a lack of clear accountabilities and poor communication. Individuals felt disempowered from suggesting or initiating improvements.
There's a couple of different aspects in the role of communication. Firstly, it's actually finding the information from the right areas. And the second is, once we've got that information, or towards the end of your risk planning activity, to then inform the right people in order to get the right level of attention or action.
No matter what an organisation does, it interacts with a wider environment. What industry sector is it in? Who are its stakeholders? What are its capabilities?
Context is the second step, but it's really the foundation that we're building. The rest of the risk management process is built up on context. And context is one of the hardest ones to come to grip with. Too often people start to look at themselves as if they're a little universe of their own. But there's all that big wide world outside the fence that you have to take into account when you're putting context together.
The evidence demonstrated that the personnel did not sufficiently understand the ship safety regime under which Westralia operated. The contracting staff did not understand that machinery modifications to this class of ship require a full approval process.
Stakeholders do have an influence on setting the context, because remember, we go back, the very first thing we should be saying when we're setting the context is, what are our objectives and what is the environment in which we're wanting to set this business up in? And part of the environment is, who are our stakeholders?
The report found that some doctors and administrators expressed the view that in certain cases it's better to provide an inadequate patient care service than to provide no service. The report stated there could be no justification for this view.
The first thing is being very clear about what is your objective, because remember, risk is a chance of something happening that will impact on your objectives.
The internal context includes setting scope and boundaries by defining the project and the objectives.
The project was promoted to the public by people in government and a commercial radio station who did not know the hazards. The inquest into the death observed there was no need for any public official to create or turn the project into a media promotion.
The context also includes establishing the risk criteria. For example, the kinds of consequences to be considered.
Risk management context then comes down to, what's our appetite for risk? So one of the things that the board and the CEO has to clearly establish is, what are the parameters of our risk tolerance? You know, at what stage are we going into aversion? At what stage are we going into recklessness?
The elective surgery target was necessary for the hospital to obtain maximum funding. Dr. Patel maintained a high throughput of surgery. He made himself so valuable in that respect that there may have been a reluctance to investigate him.
A risk that has not been identified cannot be managed.
We've got to be saying, what are the things that I do here? What are the decisions I make here? How do they affect other parts of the enterprise? How do they impact on how the organisation actually achieves its objectives?
The inquest found that the process by which some persons were appointed was connected to the death. Poor work practices in the appointment process permitted 2 persons to be assigned to the demolition project who were entirely unqualified for the task. There was a failure to check Dr. Patel's credentials. Had that been done, his discreditable past would probably have been revealed.
The whole game around risk management is to try and turn that uncertainty into a degree of certainty. So at least we've got a higher level of confidence that what we're doing about the situation is going to position us in a better way.
So what we've got to do is look at, how can we tap into corporate memory and corporate knowledge? Now, one of the ways to do that is a slice group, but use a diagonal slice, so that we've got senior people, we've got supervisors, we've got workers, but they're across the organisation.
The evidence demonstrated that the personnel did not have the level of training in or theoretical knowledge of diesel engines to alert them to the possible dangers.
We've then also got to be willing to say, what's industry best practice? What's industry experience? because we might not necessarily be the world's best practice. There may be things that we can learn from outside.
A poor level of hazard awareness resulted in people accepting levels of risk that are considered higher than for comparable installations. One consequence was that temporary office trailers were inappropriately situated. This contributed to the deaths of workers.
Bringing together the right information is vital. It requires a systematic approach, including the use of expert knowledge and organisational experience.
The destruction of a tyre caused damage to the aircraft, leading to a crash less than 1 minute and 30 seconds into the flight. All 109 passengers and crew were killed. The plane also crashed into a small hotel, killing 4 employees.
When we start to formalise risk management, we then start to use more formal tools and techniques such as looking at process mapping, looking at task analysis, taking the information out of our SWOT analysis and looking at the weaknesses and threats and turning those into risks. And so really putting a little bit more structure around the risk identification activity.
The accident investigation listed 57 recorded cases of tyre bursts on Concordes over the years. On 12 occasions, the puncture caused structural damage to the wings, and on 6 occasions, the fuel tanks were penetrated. However, these events had never before caused tank rupture or a fuel fire.
The aim of risk analysis is to estimate likelihood and consequences in the context of any existing control measures.
The investigation stated that the accident showed that the destruction of a tyre, a simple event which could not be asserted not to reoccur, had catastrophic consequences.
And then we put together our risk matrix, where we're able to show consequences and likelihood, and then that establishes the level of risk. The other critical part of analysis is looking at what controls we have in place. And quite often we assume that the controls are good.
There were no regular meetings that effectively monitored clinical performance and no adequate recording of complaints. For example, there were more than 20 complaints against Dr. Patel, yet that fact was not apparent from the complaints record.
And therefore we need to be looking at those controls to say, are they still relevant? Are they still cost effective? Are they in fact providing us with the protection we think they are? And then the next step is to say, how well does management enforce them? Because you can have the best controls in the world, but if nobody enforces them, you've got no controls.
The inquest stated that the risk assessment plan was a failure. The plan did not address the specific methodology to be used or the experience of the contractor in undertaking similar implosions. Also, it was a major failing in the entire project that no expert check of an independent nature was made at any stage.
When you start with a process, say 40% of your time is up in the context and then really you spend the time trying to get the risks right, your analysis should flow fairly quickly and your evaluation is then really just making a decision. Is it acceptable, yes or no? Do I have the right level of authority to make that decision, yes or no? If no, who do I escalate it to?
The output of risk evaluation is a prioritised list of risks for further action.
The BP investigation team found that safety and systematic risk reduction priorities had not been set by management.
If I've got 2 risks that have been measured on exactly the same scale, I would then look at what risk dimension they have an impact on. Is it a financial risk or a capability risk? Is it a reputation risk or a safety risk? And then I would actually prioritise those different dimensions, which would then help me sort out or prioritise and order those risks.
The purpose of risk treatment is to change the risk to a level where the benefit exceeds the cost of treatment.
Having done your risk assessment where you've identified, analysed and evaluated your risk, you now have to make a decision. Is the risk now at a tolerable level, or does it in fact require additional treatment to get it to a tolerable level?
A cost-benefit analysis is very useful in risk treatment, and ultimately that's the decision that we need to make. When we're determining how low can we get the risk, it's all about, well, what's the benefit at that stage?
When the price of jet fuel hit an all-time record, many airlines struggled to maintain their profit levels. By hedging against increases in jet fuel prices, some airlines have saved hundreds of millions of dollars.
What we need to do is identify the most effective treatment strategies. Now, if we're to do that, that really needs to be linked back to, in the risk identification stage, the causes of the actual risk or the root cause.
Risk treatment is based on an understanding of how risks arise. This includes the need to consider the organisation's culture.
The report stated that there was no adequate investigation of complaints. There were even threats of retribution to those who saw it as their duty to raise issues about inadequate health care.
Business conditions can change suddenly. Organisations need to protect themselves from disruption, interruption or loss in supplying their products and services.
America's largest mass transit system ground to a halt because of the first strike in 25 years. It created traffic chaos and economic damage to retailers, restaurants and other businesses.
Good business continuity plans are part of the overall management of risk within the organisation. Sure, they're a treatment, but they should really be seen as part of that overall risk management regime that is saying, how do I keep achieving my objectives? And a good business continuity plan is really predicated on what are the objectives, therefore how do I have to manage if I have a disaster.
The final step in the process is to monitor the risk management strategy, plans and practices. Are there new risks? Will the risk treatment still be effective?
Companies need to take a dedicated approach to keeping their risk management process and program alive, because at the end of the day, risk is never static. You know, it's always changing. Situations are always changing. Therefore, your risk management system or program needs to be responsive and needs to mature and change with the organisation.
Parts of the business should all be looking at their risk register to review it to see whether there's new risks, whether the things that they said were acceptable or tolerable are still tolerable, or have they been sitting over in the corner transmuting into two-headed monsters that now actually need a formal treatment program.
At no stage were Dr. Patel's skill and competence assessed by a committee of his peers, as required under government health policy and guidelines.
So the monitoring and review, it's part of good management, but it's an integral part of risk management, because you've got to make sure that you still understand what are your risks and what you're doing to manage them.
Risk management is a logical and systematic process which needs to be an integrated part of normal business.
It's up to every manager, everybody with a delegation, to clearly understand what are the risks that they manage and to make sure that they are managing them to achieve our objectives. The greatest risk, though, is to take no risk at all, because if we don't take risk, there's no advancement, there's no progress, there's no profitability.
Whether it is launching a sail or launching a space shuttle, every organisation has risks.
And liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th.
At every level in the organisation, the risk maker and the risk taker must be the risk manager.
Challenger, go and throttle up.
On the anniversary of the Apollo Challenger disaster, June Scobie Rogers, wife of Challenger Commander Dick Scobie, said he knew about the risks and accepted them as a test pilot.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery, beginning America's new journey to the moon, Mars.
She said without risk, there's no discovery, there's no new knowledge, there's no bold adventure. The greatest risk is to take no risk.